As more people are arriving, they will be just joining us. So I would like to welcome everybody to this webinar. It's the second, well, the webinar for our second round of stakeholder consultation on our sustainability framework of Preferred by Nature. Before we start, I would just like to inform everybody that we are recording the meeting. It's just just for the purposes of being able to share this presentation also with others. So in case anybody feels uncomfortable or wants to object, you can just mention it in chat or just unmute and let us know. I hope we are fine. You are all fine with the recording. So I will start with just a brief introduction from our side in terms of the people presenting here and who have worked with the framework. We have Christian Slot here, who is our sustainability program manager. You can see him on the video. So he has been the person leading the development of the framework and the program around it. And he will be presenting part of the presentation, of course. And then we have our executive director, Peter Feilberg here, who you can also see waving on the video. He has been involved, let's say, in the core development team and been a big part of the mind behind this development. So Peter is here with us, and then myself. My name is Hando Hain. I am working in our strategy and innovation division, and have also been part of the core team working together with Christian, Peter, and others in the organization on the framework. So with that, the way we are planning this is that we are going to share a presentation. We will very briefly share about our organization, just for those of you for whom Preferred by Nature is new, and then of course using most of the time to focus on the sustainability framework. We will give an overview of the framework and also discuss the changes that have been made compared to the first version. We propose technically the way it works here, so that every one of you should be able to unmute yourself. What we suggest is that we take questions or feedback comments after the presentation. We will aim to do the presentation maximum finished by half time, so we have 1 hour scheduled for this, and then we open up for any questions or comments. You are welcome to then unmute yourself, or you can also type your question if you prefer, but we suggest perhaps you can ask. Well, with that introduction, then let's move to the next slide, please. Well, here is the agenda, which I briefly recapped. So let's go on. So just very briefly about the organization. Here you can see our vision and our mission. Our vision is a world where human choices truly ensure a sustainable future for everybody. And then the way we see ourselves and our organization contributing it is to support better land management and business practices. And then we have linked it to these 3 areas, people, nature, and the climate. I already mentioned now that we have built also the sustainability framework around this mission statement. So it also covers those same areas, like better practices in general. And then it has 1 pillar for each of the 3 areas, people, nature, and the climate. Next slide, please. We are a non-profit organization. We are grateful that we have been able to work with quite many organizations, companies in quite many countries around the world. We have a workforce of close to 300 people located in around 40 countries, and then working with companies in more than 100 countries. And our focus is, of course, to support companies in being truly sustainable, and we realize we are only one part in this collective effort. If we go to the next slide, please. So here is the 3 areas. We work with projects, then we have a different portfolio of sustainability services, and lastly we also have a training program through which we share our experience and knowledge. Going on, please. Next one. So then that was very briefly as to keep the time for the framework. So about the framework, next slide, please. I'll start very generally. So the thinking that we have worked with the idea for many years already, and we have applied this idea also through our timber legality work, working with EU timber regulation and so on. But we had the idea already before of having an approach which is both risk-based and which can be adopted. So the framework that we have developed, we have tried to include all sustainability issues which we consider to be, let's say, core issues for the sustainability. Christian will mention later, there is some topics which we haven't fit into the framework, which we plan to address through add-on modules. We'll come back to this. But the idea is that there is a single framework which can be used in different levels. It can be used on landscape level or on the natural resource management level, then on the landscape, let's say, whether it's a farm or forest. It can be also used throughout the supply chain and also by other sectors, potentially, like, for example, financial investments, in order to ensure that those are supporting sustainable practices rather than those which are contrary to this. And then two things, again, we'll mention this more, but two, let's say, features which we see critical to the way the framework is used, that even though it's a generic framework, of course, the nuances and issues in different sectors, crops and so on, they are different. So the framework would be adapted to different sectors. And secondly, the framework implementation, before implementation, it would also be adapted to the risks. So essentially, that the focus is on the risk areas, or the areas which are most, let's say, most critical. That not everything needs to be looked at. So if we move on, here is you can see just in terms of how on the first level the framework is built up. I mentioned before it's linked to our mission, so you can see the general principle on best management and business practices, and then there is one on people, nature, and then a separate one for climate. And on the next slide, you can see the topics which are covered under each principle. So you can see there are 5 like generic principles about best management practices, 11 social things, and then 8 under nature. Some of them are, of course, are more larger, others are more specific, but essentially what we've tried to do is cover all critical things in relation to the sustainability. And under the climate, we have 4 topics. So then I believe on the next one, well, Christian will take over and explain a bit more than how the program is structured, how the framework could be used, give some illustrations. So Christian, please.
Yes, thank you, Hando. Thank you. Yeah, just a continuation of, Hando just gave an overview of the contents of the sustainability framework itself. We also have some supporting standards that contains requirements that's necessary for the implementation of the framework. So we have the actual framework here as number 1 on the left. Then we have another standard which is also a normative requirement for a certified organization with requirements on quality management. And then we have the third standard, which is a supplier management and due diligence standard, which is only applicable to companies that use the sustainability framework when they source products or commodities from a supply chain. So that's the structure of the framework and supporting standards. So as Hando also touched on before, the idea is to have a framework that can be applied at different levels of the supply chain. So we can use the framework for land managers, producers, factories that are upstream in a supply chain, but also through application of the supplier management and due diligence standard, use the framework for downstream operators such as traders, manufacturers, or brand owners and retailers. Sorry. So the idea is to have the framework that's applicable both at land use level, but also downstream in the supply chain. Another thing that's been very important for us in the development of the framework is to underline that the framework is something that's supposed to be covering gaps or meet a need where companies may be certified for some of their products or commodities against several different standards. So you could look at the sustainability framework as an umbrella framework where we would recognize existing certification schemes where relevant. So we would then benchmark other certification schemes against the framework and acknowledge and recognize the assurance that they provide. Of course, if there are gaps in the existing certification systems that companies are using, for example, gaps of commitments they would like to address. Let's say a company would like to address climate change as one of their key sustainability commitments, and their current certification systems did not address this, then we would use the sustainability framework principle on climate change to cover that gap. So the idea is to have a flexible framework that can be used to meet critical gaps in existing schemes and also support the use of existing schemes where they are available. So that's it's an important point in our efforts to underline that we do not seek to replace existing schemes where they cover the sustainability commitments that are already made by industry. Another thing that's a key point to the application of the framework is that we can apply the requirements through a risk-based approach. That means that we will use what we call a top-down risk-based approach, where we would filter out risks from a global level to a national level, and then to an actual commodity and source specific risk assessment. So that would mean that in countries or with commodities where there is limited risk, the requirements where there is no risk would not be applicable in that area. So that would enable the user and us and the certification bodies to apply the framework through a risk-based approach and focus on those issues that are actually most relevant, where there are risks, instead of having to evaluate everything of the standard everywhere at all times. So this will enable a more efficient application of an approach to assurance, where we can look at a risk. So we would also adapt the framework to the actual commodity or the specific source type that we're working with. So there will be a risk adjustment and a commodity adaptation of the requirements. So here's a brief example that we have worked with rubber in Sri Lanka with the framework, where we would then take the generic sustainability framework. We would then evaluate if the requirements of the framework, here are two examples from criteria 1.2 and 2.6. We would then evaluate those criteria and the indicators, if they are relevant for rubber in this case, and relevant for the area or the source area, in this case Sri Lanka. And then we would either adapt the generic indicators to rubber, or we would add new relevant indicators where applicable. So that's it's a flexible process where we will we have the framework, and then we will only add or adapt issues or requirements where they are relevant to that specific commodity. The next step, as I said, would be to adjust for risk. So when we use the framework in a specific country or region for a specific commodity, we would then conduct a commodity and source type specific risk assessment. And then wherever there is low risk, those issues could simply be taken out of the final checklist. So here an example where, and this is only an example, where we had, through the risk assessment process, concluded that there is low risk for criterion 2.6. We can then make that not applicable in this case and take it out of the checklist. So the final checklist would only be would only include those issues that where there might be risks, and then also have here an adjustment to smallholders. So in this adjustment process, only the relevant indicators would be transferred into the final checklist. So that means that you potentially could end up with a much shorter and more simple checklist that would actually be audited in the field or at the company level. So in terms of seal use and claims, we will allow certified operations to use the preferred by nature seal, which you can see here on the right. So but that requires that there is full conformance with all the requirements of the framework, as well as relevant system requirements in that standard, in order to use the seal and make certified claims. We have tested the framework and the adaptation process to rubber. As I mentioned before, we have actually done this work in Sri Lanka. We have certified a rubber plantation in Sri Lanka using adaptation of the framework to that setting, to Sri Lanka and to rubber. So we have already issued the first certificate. So that obviously gave us some important experience in how we adapt the framework to specific commodities, and also looking at the risk assessment process for source type and commodity specific issues. So in terms of the stakeholder consultation, I will give you a brief overview of key revisions to version 1.1. So these are the revisions we have made during the last 6 months, and which we are now seeking stakeholder input for. So we had another stakeholder consultation round in autumn last year, where we received a number of comments. So we have registered and published all these comments. So there's a summary using this link, where you can see both a summary of the changes and the comments, but also a full list of all the feedback that we received. In the previous consultation round, we also raised a number of questions on issues where we had to make a decision, and they were specifically these 4 issues here. So on GMO, we have opted not to include a direct reference to GMO in the framework, but what we will do is that it will be an add-on module and guidance developed as an add-on if relevant for our clients or users of the framework. The second point related to cutoff dates for the legal status of land tenure. This is an issue if you have a company that has acquired land and there might be conflicts in the past where we then considered if there could be some cutoff date for evaluation of the legality of land tenure. But we concluded that that's not possible with reference to human rights conventions. Similarly, for conversion, we were discussing and asking for feedback on cutoff dates for conversion of forest and natural ecosystems. We have formulated some definitions using a rolling cutoff date for conversion, which includes a 10-year rolling date in the past. There are some specific requirements related to perennial and annual crops, which are in the standard itself. And then for best practice indicators in the previous version of the framework, we included best practice indicators, but we have decided to remove them from the framework itself. Some of them we have changed to core requirements where they were relevant. Others will be addressed in implementation guidance if we still believe that they are relevant. One of the main reasons for this was that it's not possible to conduct a risk-based approach on best practice indicators, so we decided to move it outside the actual framework. Some other revisions. I'm not going to go through a lot of details on what we have changed in terms of specific changes to language, rewording, reordering, addition of new indicators and so on, but there are some of the criteria has been quite heavily revised and adjusted. For example, the criteria on child labor has been significantly revised to make it more consistent, use consistent definitions and make it more clear what the requirements are. Also, Principle 1 has been changed quite a lot. The previous version focused a lot on legal issues. We have now changed that to focus more on responsible business management and business practices, and also including issues related to land conflicts and human rights issues in general as part of the definition of what responsible business management means. Then there are some revisions also on criterion 2.2 on modern slavery, on criterion 2.5 on remuneration has also been significantly expanded and clarified, and also Principle 4 on climate change has been revised also significantly. But I would, of course, recommend that you have a look. We have noted in the framework itself, and there's a column on the left-hand side of the table where we have noted where we have added or changed wording of criteria and indicators. There are also some general revisions to the framework itself. We have changed the numbering. So before we had numbering of the criteria from 1 to 29, we have now changed that numbering. We have also added processing indicators, or we have added on the right-hand side of the framework, we have added where indicators of the framework are relevant in terms of processing or manufacturing. So the framework would not only be used, be possible to be used in a in a land management setting, but also at the processing and manufacturing stage. Then, as I said, we have taken out the previous sections of the framework, which were called part B1 and B2 of the last version, and placed them in individual standards. That in order to make it more simple and clear to understand which standards we are referring to. We have removed one criterion from the framework, and that is the fair pricing criterion. Some of the requirements that were in there is now reflected in Principle 1 related to responsible business management. But also we will add guidance on this, operational guidance on this issue to support the framework in this area. So in relation to further work, where we are going from now, I mean, we are in the middle of the public consultation for version 1.1, which runs from 3rd of June to 4th of August. So we hope that we will have a new version with all the inputs from this stakeholder consultation in August this year. There's of course a lot of work surrounding the framework to develop additional all the operational guidance, the add-ons and the guidance documents, and also expand on our chain of custody system. We already have in Preferred by Nature a generic chain of custody standard, but we'll expand on this to provide more options for traceability and COC solutions. So yeah, that I think was all for now. So I think we can turn to questions and we'll try to answer.